Welcome, everybody, especially Luther. Welcome to Mud Flood Was Armageddon. The Mud Flood was Armageddon. Don't let them tell you anything else unless they are willing to debate you in a fair and honest way. As I am prone to do, I want to show you a fair use disclaimer. I'm going to be looking at some other videos. Not sure if the pictures are going to jump out at you and make you go, I want to do a back handspring or something like that. But there's your thumbnail. This will just be touched on briefly, but does seem that the regular scientists, because they don't want the flat earthers to be called that, but they're now into that those trees are getting electricity up there. I thought you'd like to see that Iran has mastered the art of putting missiles in trucks, according to some show I was watching. This girl here said practically no doubt left that it is possible to drive a teenager to the brink of death remotely through well known games. The scale of the catastrophe is monstrous. I guess 2015, 2016, they started putting out games that were dangerous for children, and in Russia, United States, and I guess in Facebook, they proved that by what they show you, they can control you, or at least how you think. Tunal Assay, pros and cons, can report late stage apoptosis. Haven't covered the apoptosis in a while. We'll touch on it today. A comet assay is not like Halley's comet or Halley's comet, as we used to call it. Individual cells that's in your body embedded, proteins removed from the cell, DNA allowed to unwind, DNA undergoes electrophoresis, broken DNA fragments migrate away from the nucleus after staining gel red for amount of fluorescence in head, tail, and length of tail. So anyway, a comet assay is how modern medicine is proving that, wow, we're messed up. Here's an example of it, of a normal cell. Now, something's been done and people have damaged cells, and they call it a comet tail now. This is a real thing. They're calling this comet tail in your body, each individual cell. Damaged cells have comet tails. How about that? Got to read this. But the lunar year is 11 days shorter than the solar year, even as early as the second millennium BC. Intercalary days were inserted to bring the solar and lunar cycle into alignment. This knowledge is reflected in the ornamentation of the golden hat. I can't let that go. I probably should have. Let's see if we got anything else going the other way. Nope. So there you go. Very good stuff right there. How you guys doing? Let's check out what the Lord has in mind. First off, I can't feel like I've been the good minister of a ministry if I don't just keep saying it's not only Roundup and glyphosate in the United States, they are effectively poisoning the world. And I'm glad they've scientifically designed your Doritos with a chemical that opens up the taste buds before it even touches your tongue so that you think a Dorito is the most delicious thing in the world. It is not. It's not healthy for you. Uh, I'm just going to pop in here and see.
Question qu'on se pose sur le glyphosate. Donc, c'est quand même beaucoup de mélanges de molécules qui peuvent
Can't
causer.
really hear that.
Benitez remembers.
Oregon, claro, cuando me mantenía principalmente conceptual porque lago asentamiento yerere, 24 horas hoy en nada, brasileros masivamente tóxicos, avión, tractor,
The whole village is contaminated.
cualquier foto podemos ver, 20.
La mayor parte del tema de verdura ya no sale. Tomate, todo eso ya no sale más luego. Daba mucho fruto, pero ahora ya no anda más. Tener
This
que
is the
comprar
whole
ese
country.
híbrido con
And you know, the
tratamiento y todo.
scientists,
De muerte neonatal. Antes era la quinta. Y por otro lado, a nivel país, la segunda causa son los cánceres. Y entonces es una llamada de atención que hay que investigar. ¿Por qué? ¿Qué está pasando? Varias son las causas, ¿verdad? Existe una predisposición genética, pero también
they're not growing food right, man. They are poisoning people all over the world.
Effects. Paraguayan kids who live nearby those soybean fields have a very damaged DNA, 45.9% of genetic damage, much more than the children living close to an organic agriculture area.
And if they can't find a way to mess up your DNA with glyphosate, Roundup, and the other stuff, they're sad. But they've got it fixed now. Somehow they can mess up your
by first
DNA
exposing the neurons
or
to various
mRNA.
DNA-damaging conditions, collecting the neurons, and mixing them with low melting point agarose. The second step is to immobilize the neurons on slides. Next, the neurons are lysed and then subjected to electrophoresis. In the final step, the DNA is stained with cyber green.
And they can tell. They're messing with us, man. What do you got, dude?
Demonstrating the COMET assay, which is a simple method to detect DNA damage in cells. The main advantage of this technique over other existing methods, such as the gamma H2AX foci staining, as well as the pulse field gel electrophoresis, is that this technique is a direct and sensitive method to measure DNA damage.
Something we're not told to be afraid of. So this nick into labeling?
Nucleotides at the 3' hydroxyl open ends. So this nucleotide which is incorporated, it can be, let's say, a labeled nucleotide, a fluorescently labeled nucleotide, or let's say a biotin labeled nucleotide, which can be later on detected by fluorescently labeled streptavidin. Also, it can be.
From what I can understand, they only have a vague idea of what they're doing, and cells are going to die. You want apoptosis. There's a good way for a cell to die and a bad way.
Cells that would be indicative of more apoptosis. Another way to look at this data is to count the percentage viable cells. All the tunnel negative cells would be the viable cells. So obviously, if this drug is potent and able to kill cells that are cancerous, so there would be less viable.
And honestly, how old is this one? 2 years ago? I searched for, apoptosis and things like that, and they all came up 4 or 5 years old. And the newer ones, I can only say it's hard for people who English as their first language to kind of understand some of it. But if you get used to it, you can say, man, it's all over the world. People are, the investor controversy. I mentioned it. I want to, talk about it again. 50 years of conflict. It comes down to the ring and the staff of the Pope. Sure, they want us to believe that it all happened because some people didn't understand that there was a Pope in Rome that some people believed that should you just run the church. But other people are going like, no, that is a part of history. And they made up a church. They added 1,000 years. They did all that. And they're not giving citations. They're just telling us that's the way it is, because they've rewritten history. And we know it, you know it, the American people know it, and it's time to quit doing it. Now, yesterday was a big day for me. I ended up going to that art show and opening of the museum. They change it 4 times a year. And Joaquin came back later and was like, I just am having a hard time with the whole flat earth stuff. So we went over it and I remembered the day, the July 8th, and we looked that up and showed him that how can 95% of the earth, be shown at one time? And, he's looking at it and, he's familiar with how can the sun and the moon be seen at the same time and only half of the moon is illuminated. So that witness is, you wish that people would jump right on board with flat earth, but it is a struggle because of how hard they did it. Something's going on in those buildings back in the day. Break it down for us, okay, dude?
And at the top is a huge skylight, which originally sunlight came through it. It's been built over since then, with images of all the great financial powers of history, all the different nations with their symbols. And it's set up as a shopping arcade, really the first time that stores have been brought into an office building lobby in New York, modeled after the arcades of Paris. Up in the second floor, there are 2 murals. They look like Italian triptychs. One represents commerce and one represents labor. Because
I noticed that one commerce there was holding a globe.
There are 2 murals. They look like Italian
holding a
triptychs.
globe.
One represents
sure,
commerce and one represents labor, because this is a secular building. But the architecture suggests religious models. And
management and labor.
Became known once it was open as a cathedral of commerce. There was an opening dinner, and a local divine, S. Parks Cadman, gave the grand opening.
Yeah. How much of these buildings did they take over? How much could they redo? What do you got? What do you got here in the murals?
It's an interesting choice. In the center, this is still in the ceiling. What you see is the construction of the building going on. These images of workmen are not just images, they're actually portraits. The muralist, Edward Trumbull, had the workers pose for their portraits, and these are their likenesses. Though you don't see it in this particular image, they come together.
It's just the Chrysler building, right?
There was actually a swimming pool, Olympic-sized swimming pool.
Oh, we're not at the Chrysler building yet. So here's that one. Why they didn't have the look at there. There's the 2 towers, September 11th, 2001. The world knew they were coming down. And there was going to be the last reset. And here we go.
1980, it had changed, but to your left, that was still the skyline of 1930. So let's have a look at the Empire State Building now, and a space that everyone has seen on the outside, but no one gets to see on the inside. And that's the mast at the very, very top of the building. This was built, as you see on the left, with the intention of being a mooring mast for dirigibles. This is before the Hindenburg disaster put an end to dirigibles as a viable means of transportation. And the idea was that the dirigible would float into Manhattan, tie up at the top of the mooring mast, and open.
That was a nice view, right? They claim that it never happened because the wind causes a 40-mile-an-hour updraft. So it never was used, but there's a remnant of it there.
Time to have a look at the towers on the outside. And what you see here are the series of towers. Each of these was the world's tallest building. There were 6 of them in New York. The Woolworth Building was number 3. The Chrysler was number 4. The Empire State Building was number 5. The World Trade Center Towers, the old one, was number 6. The Woolworth Building began as a much smaller proposal. They didn't have the whole site.
There's just something going on.
It's sort of a beige, a tan, no one quite knows what to call it. And it seems to be just one color, but that's an illusion because hidden between the windows, if you look at them carefully looking for it, you'll find them. There are tiles that are in blue and yellow and red, and they're not meant to be seen. They're meant to give an internal luster to the color overall.
Wow, people were into it, man.
And that's what you see in the Empire State Building. That's why those setbacks are there. You also see in this model, it shows it quite nicely, is that there is a base that's actually quite sizable. It's 5 stories tall, and it extends quite a ways on either side of the building. And that's actually quite brilliant because what it means is that if you're on the city street next to this world's tallest building, you don't even see the tallest building. You don't, because you'd have to look up and it's hard to do. What you see is the 5-story base, which fits into the scale of the streets around it. So this 100-story building.
There's something there. In the 1930s, you can get something done, you know, if you pay the people and you're willing to pay them, and then afterwards say, look what we did, how come we can't do it anymore? A country founded for commerce in a world that is flat, run by electricity, you're run by electricity, we're spirits waiting to happen. We're going to be changed. We're known from before the foundation of the earth.
Our region. We often, as probably many of you know, I'm not going to tell you anything new, our rain often comes in our rainy season. That's why it's called the rainy season. You know, our late fall through our winter and early spring, we get rain. We also get fog in the summer. And I think most of you have noticed that we also along the Central Coast don't have snowpack, yet we have amazingly crystal clear and cold perennial streams. And I think it's a really interesting analogy to think about solar power and batteries, where landscapes, when they're healthy, we have rainstorms come with all this energy being dropped from the atmosphere, you know, a ton of energy in each rain droplet. And as those droplets come down, trees, canopy, leaves, duff below, etc., all begin to absorb and capture that energy and store it in the duff, store it in along the.
Did he say store it in the dust? Store it in the duff. Oh, I thought he said dust. Come on, you know what he meant.
Well, what does that lead to? What it leads to is starting really in the 1950s, but moving on is massive public works, straightening creeks, creating.
Past 70 years is what we've known. And, you know, I've known most of that. Big changes in 1958. We have this world left over that obviously people tried to fix the earth and it didn't work.
Drainage channels everywhere, efficient draining, efficient hardened draining. We've got concrete being put in everywhere because we're speeding up the slope. We're straightening these channels. We can't leave them as dirt because there's too much energy. It's not a fit. And so we're in this positive feedback loop, more and more water, more and more energy, and having to build more and more infrastructure. By the way, just for those of you listening, I am going to actually get to a much more finer point soon, but I just want to set this context for folks, and I hope it's making sense.
Let's see that finer point.
And so this is just Scott Creek near Davenport. This is over a 30-year time, and you can see this sort of reach of, there's many others like this, of Scott Creek that sort of doubled the riparian area in width.
What I'm trying to prove here and show to you is that, you know, if you leave the big cities and, oh no, I can't go to my bank or my favorite cappuccino store every day, you can still live, and you can actually start with a bad situation and make it better.
Physically afford or have access to get equipment in, and you can pull trees out and actually have the root wad. It's a whole different ball of wax.
Anyway, these guys are spending a fortune for colleges to prove what it works. Give me something.
Survive and sustain their populations.
Yeah, and it's not just fish. All kinds of aquatic insects and whatnot are gathering in those gravel, and so help people understand. And then I want to bring us back to and talk a little bit more about some of the specific work you've done at Mill Creek, but help people understand you know, maybe they don't care about fish. And they think channelized stream, not that bad. You could still have a great redwood forest. So it's got a fast stream blasting through it. But that's not the case. We know increasingly that having a healthy stream is critical to the long-term viability of that forest, both because of the nutrients coming from the salmon.
We know how to do it. We know how to fix it.
What you're looking at here is a 120-year-old photograph taken in Berlin. The buildings still stand, but today the one on the right looks quite different. As you can see, all the ornamentation is gone, and what is left is a somewhat incomplete structure. This phenomenon is called Entstuckung, which is the deliberate removal of stucco from buildings. It happened all over Germany, and nowhere is it more visible than here in the German capital. In fact, you can hardly walk down any of the city's streets without noticing one of these odd houses.
So these were all, you know, Gothically designed. This one was too, but it's been an active movement for quite a while, starting in Germany, saying, you know what? We don't need that stuff. Go.
Historicism. As the name suggests, historicism drew inspiration from the past. It gained popularity for various reasons, with the most significant being industrialization. With more people finding themselves in rapidly changing and impersonal environments,
Yeah, I bet you that's the way it goes in Satan's Little Season, right?
the need for stability grew. As such, architects and artists began using elements from styles that harken back to simpler times. Gothic arches, Greek columns, and timbered facades.
So
all
this
began-
is how they're trying to say, oh, they just rebuilt it because they liked it, but then eventually they didn't like it.
Obviously, most buildings didn't take it this far, but you get the idea. Okay, so you had all these buildings using some design elements that were popular in the past. Where exactly is the problem?
Yeah.
Well, just a few kilometers away from Schillerplatz was a young architecture student who was witnessing this movement firsthand. His name was Adolf Loos, and he would go on to become one of its
Did Adolf, he didn't like all that fancy stuff, man.
In his famous essay, Ornament and Crime, Loos attacks his contemporaries from various angles, where perhaps his most widespread critique, also commonly echoed today, is that ornamentation is disingenuous.
I haven't heard that one.
Consider a Gothic cathedral or a timbered framed house. These buildings look the way they do, in part because the technique
Huh. Keep going, man. So there was then all of a sudden a German movement that said, we don't like ornamentation, it's a crime?
out, the well-known case here being the Bauhaus movement. Eventually, these ideas began to flourish in liberal Weimar Germany, and in addition to all the new modern buildings being constructed, the first wave of stucco removal.
So when they're saying that stucco removal, they're taking this building and making it into this building and loving it.
Emerged. Berlin in particular became a laboratory, so to speak. As the capital and the cultural center of the Republic, it attracted architects eager to redesign historicist facades. How many buildings they were able to transform remains unknown, but generally speaking,
I don't know. You can fool some of the people some of the time. Huh.
Resources to spend on extensive facade renovations, tearing it down was often the pragmatic choice.
Oh.
That being said, this massive wave wasn't solely driven by pragmatists. Other countries, also greatly impacted by the war, saw no similar push. Therefore, one might
because Germany was going to try to set the mind of the people.
Look awkward and incomplete. By the 70s, public opinion had shifted and
Wow, public opinion did shift in the 70s, didn't it? They made abortion legal. They found, they say, in the United States Constitution, a right to privacy so women can end the life of their children. Yes, the 70s were very weird.
Preservation efforts became widespread. Fast forward to today, and many historicist buildings are now protected. What's
So they used to hate it, but now they don't.
5, 4, 3, 2, 1, 0. All engine running. Liftoff. We have a liftoff. 32 minutes past the hour. Liftoff on Apollo 11.
The 7-pound Westinghouse SSTV space camera was a technological feat, but there was a problem. The space camera couldn't broadcast in the right resolution or frame rate for television. So, in order to show the world this momentous occasion, engineers at NASA tracking stations took the lunar signal, displayed it on a 10-inch video monitor, and used TV cameras to literally film the monitor.
That'll work. Oh, yeah, I remember watching that. I think I was 11 years old. And it was like, look, we're landing on the moon. I can see the shapes moving, and they're on the moon.
Different contrast, brightness, and resolution was broadcast worldwide. However, the original, raw, high-resolution stream was also recorded onto 1-inch telemetry tapes as a backup. Those historically valuable tapes were stored away until the early 1980s, which is when NASA completely lost track of them. That's right, NASA lost the original recording.
All right, so let me reinterpret this. NASA stored them for 10 years or less and then recorded over them because they knew it was only a matter of time before they were exposed.
Recordings of the Apollo 11 moon landing. Well, maybe lost isn't quite the right word. The original tapes were most likely reused or overwritten with low-resolution satellite imagery for the National Oceanic and Atmospheric.
That's what I would do if I had them.
Became the ultimate justification, even if it meant sweeping the horrors of the past under the rug. Operation Paperclip represents one of the most complex moral dilemmas in American history. The questions posed by Operation Paperclip are not just relics of the past, they remain deeply relevant today. In a world still grappling with the ethics of technological progress and global power dynamics, we're often reminded that the pursuit of dominance, whether through scientific innovation, justice. But let's not forget another pivotal player.
For this story, you ought to talk to Dr. Hubertus Strugold.
Strugold had been involved in experiments at the Dachau concentration camp, where prisoners were subjected to cruel and lethal experiments on how the human body responds to extreme conditions. Despite the evidence of his wartime atrocities, Strugold's name was eventually cleared. Once again, in the interest of
The town was Oswiecim, known to the Germans as Auschwitz. Ambrose found the site otherwise suitable and was particularly interested in the possibility of using the concentration camp inmates to erect the plant. All of which
Now, I think if you look at Auschwitz, it was a star fort, but they repurposed it. Was that Amy Jacobson or Annie?
That were of great interest to the United States.
So why did the U.S. welcome them with open arms? The answer lies in the geopolitical reality of the time. The Cold War had begun, and with the Soviet Union snapping up German scientists in its own operation, the U.S. couldn't afford to fall behind. Now,
You know what? That's just too bad because they had to deal with the. Well, they taught them eugenics. Let's quit pretending. Henry Ford was friends with Adolf Hitler, and they introduced eugenics to him, and the Germans said, "You're not trying hard enough. We'll show you how to do it." We fake fought them. We fake developed an atomic bomb. We let the two powers of the world, China and Russia, lose multiple millions of people. The United States lost a lot, 300,000. They lost multiple millions. And then we're forced to go along with the United States saved the world, and that's what we're going to go with until the Salt Paco.
Nazi intelligence officer who had run the Wehrmacht's intelligence service on the Eastern Front. After the war, Galen offered his vast intelligence network to the Americans, promising valuable insight into Soviet military operations.
Thereafter, until his break with Hitler in April 1945, Galen reported regularly on all matters to do with Russia's war effort.
How about that? America loves spies.
He believed that the United States was sacrificing its moral integrity for the sake of power.
Who did? Albert Einstein did.
And he was right to question whether these scientists' contributions could ever justify the atrocities they had committed. But for the U.S. government, it wasn't about morality, it was about survival. The Cold War was a battle for global supremacy.
I think I might do a whole show on this, but you'll get an idea of how ignorant Judaizers are. I left a comment. You're the problem. Way to go, Lit Path.
There's a lot of confusion as to what the new covenant is, to whom it applies, and when it takes effect. This is on point with the time we live in, the little season of the adversary. I have to imagine when he was released from the pit and saw the whole earth keeping the Torah, he must have thought, well, this is unacceptable. So he devised clever ways to get people to stop keeping the law. He invented dispensations of time.
Wow. So we got 10 minutes of the biggest nonsense in the world, something that, you know, where the Bible talks about the law. Really? You can't, you know, now we have a better deal going. He said, nope, nope.
One of the first things he did was to convince people they did not need to keep the Torah. That doctrine is a little season teaching. In the last video, I challenged people who may not see this yet to reread the New Testament with this in mind, just like you reread the Bible with a new cosmology in mind or with a new timeline, eschatology in mind.
These Judaizers, man, they will not stop. Check this out.
If you are someone who says, the law is written on my heart, and you do not guard the Sabbath day, for example, you witness against yourself. So please, if you are still of the mind that you can inherit the kingdom by neglecting the obligations laid out in the Torah, such as eating clean, Sabbath keeping, feast.
He wants you to keep the law, and he's saying that that's what the whole, you know, grace to the Gentiles and everything else is stupid. He hates it. He wants you to keep the law, and that is exactly what Galatians is talking about. We're going to listen to the whole thing sometime, some other day, maybe.
In Hebrews, number 1, I will put my law in their
Oh,
inward
he just reads a lot of scripture and comments here. Let's see how this guy. He's shockingly. How do you wrap it up, dude?
even the Passover before those things. It occurred at the first resurrection for those who were resurrected. Teaching otherwise is Satan's way to separate people from the Most High during this time. So examining other things you believe with the little season in mind, such as cosmology, eschatology, or anything else. Examining other things in the scriptures with a little season in mind while neglecting this giant salvation issue and not going back to the scriptures.
I mean, Judaizers don't have a problem saying this is a salvation issue. If you don't worship on Saturday, you're not. And the rest of the waffling people are going like, well, it doesn't even matter if you believe the earth is flat. You can believe it's a globe. You can believe it's a trinity. You can just believe anything as long as at one time in your life you X, Y, and Z.
Just to check it out is like straining at a gnat while swallowing a camel. Brothers and sisters, please reread the text. Go back to the Bible. Do you really need an excuse to go reread the Bible? I mean, I'm not asking you to do something burdensome. Go and reread the Word of God with this in mind and see what it says to you.
All right.
This is on point with the time we live in, the little season of the adversary. I have to imagine when he was released from the pit and saw the whole earth keeping the Torah.
Just a couple of
He
seconds
must have had
ahead.
a Christian church that is separate from the Commonwealth of Israel. He made people to think that they no longer have to adhere to the standards of the Creator in order to be with the Creator. If this is you, take a breath. We were all lied to, and it is possible to remove this veil of deception and reorient one's heart towards obedience to the Father. Realizing where we are in time makes this much, much easier. As stated in the last video, there was no dispensation of grace. There was no 2,000-year church age.
Okay, there was no 2,000-year church age, but there definitely was a dispensation of grace. The Bible is all about, the New Testament is all about grace. We have the Book of Remembrance, the Old Testament that has been, condensed. We only have those books that are guaranteed by the Spirit. Here's what you need. And then we have the New Testament. The New Testament talks about we are not under the law, but under grace. Grace is better. It's written on our heart. The law cannot save.
There was no time in the past when the law was done away with. The, quote, Old Covenant was with Moses and the children of Israel in the wilderness.
You mean the Old Covenant that isn't as good as the New Covenant? We'll have to go into this deeper later. As I was saying, it's hard to witness, because, most of the time in my preaching and ministry, I don't deal with people that are globers. That's not my ministry. We're way past that here. But in my day-to-day life, when people are like, oh man, you're the guy, you're the Flat Earth Nation Golden Age past guy. Yeah, it's kind of hard. And they like, well, he's right there. It's like, he's not a shill. He's not going to try to, he's really going like, what's up? So, I mean, the whole thing, geocentrism, whether you want it Copernican, Ptolemaic, or Tychonic, for thousands and thousands of years with the Earth in the middle, I mean, using this system, you got stars, we got stars. They're all explained. The eastward motion, we got it. The sun, non-uniform, there's different eccentric orbit rates. Yeah, they got that on the flat Earth models for thousands of years before Werner von Braun and everybody else came out and said, we've just proved that the Greeks were right. The zodiac moving through the different things. Whoa, did you see that? It just jumped off when all I was trying to do was go like that. The difference, the zodiacs, the retrograde motions, the epicycle cycles, so you can do it. You can say, oh yeah, the Earth could be like this, but it's not flat. It's a globe, but it works flat. Okay, you believe what you want to believe. It was pretty much for a long time. This is the way it goes. Should we see some of the pictures? I think they'll try to switch it back to well, it should be with the sun in the middle. Yeah. And there's the final heliocentric thing, I guess. I was geocentric and thought the Earth was a globe, but stationary starting in 1995. Still was surprised to find out that some people thought there were 7 heavens. The concept, they say, is also found in Mesopotamian religions, can be found in Judaism and Islam. Islam is just a made up hoax. Judaism, they talk about that as not the Bible, but in, the number of heavens could range from 3 to 365, with 7 being the most popular figure. Hey, thanks for that footnote that they just don't do anymore. There's the classical planets, the fixed stars. Yeah, people have been believing this in a long time because of these, and I'm not saying this picture definitely displays seven heavens, or is this only the, the sun is this high, the moon is this high, then there's a few stars here, and then there's a bunch of the tiny twinkly ones up here. I don't think this has to imply that. What do we got here? The Ordering of Paradise, 1804, that Michelangelo. So not the Michelangelo, but he had an idea of putting some art down. You got a little beehive. Is that what that is supposed to be? Look like, kind of. Go Mormons. You're crazy. That's the moon cycles through it here in the middle. They even show that must be a super blood moon because that moon's bigger. What's going on with that? There you go. Okay. So is this the zodiac or something? Upside down beehive. I just had this song. I saw this said Candida. And I remembered a song from back in the day where this guy would go, "Whoa, Candida, oh, we can make it together." Anyway, these codes and these laws, Shamash, people believed in him, huh? He was believed to see everything that happened in the world every day and was therefore responsible for enforcing people to accept homosexual behavior, transsexualism, and oh wait, no, they didn't go for that at all, did they, back then? Nobody ever went for that until now. In the last 50 years, especially since 9/11, 2001, things have certainly changed. We knew there were homosexuals before, but it wasn't, I guess it was in the early 70s where they started showing them on TV and then eventually kissing and stuff. Whatever. People are different, As a Christian, we don't have to say we agree with that because our, protected religion is no, it's not only super weird, it's super what we call evil, sinful. Yeah, all that gay stuff is just not going to make it in the Bible. And they just have to not like it because freedom of religion. That's just the way it goes. Shamash. Shebop. The Code of Hammurabi. Now, these laws that were for other gods and things like that, they all claimed they wanted a presumption of innocence. All of these laws, I guess there's people that can read this. I don't know if that's been censored or what. What are those guys doing? There's a lot of editing going on in this code. Pretty serious about it back in the day, weren't they? People wanted laws. People wanted codes. But even though they didn't have the Bible, they had their other thing. They still would have to say that this is an eye for an eye type of a situation. This is the legal text from after Cyrus, after Nebuchadnezzar, after the Babylonian gods were replaced by the Hebrew gods. But he said, the God of Daniel, he's the most high God. I've seen it. Daniel didn't get eaten. These other guys didn't get burned by fire. And now they've got this whole one God thing going here in the Code of Hammurabi, eye for an eye. And because they are using Babylonian names, they don't want to even people Just don't think it's, it does need some more. We got to get some more figuring out on it. But when they found it, they say the scholars quickly identified the lex talionis, the eye for an eye principle that is everywhere. Because it was the time of the Gentiles and they were getting ready for their time of grace when the world realized what? Gentiles are as saved as the Jews. Knowing that from the very beginning, the gospel was preached to Abraham, the book of Corinthians says, in that it said that through his descendant, all nations will be blessed. That's way before Moses. And then Isaiah, it's a continuous, that scarlet thread of where God would provide himself as the sacrifice. Our one God provided himself as the sacrifice. That's what, and it was a light to the Gentiles. Me and my friends are never going to tell you anything else. Why would we? We know it's a flat earth nation. The golden age is past. The mud flood was Armageddon. And there was a 1,000-year reign. And now you got your orphan trained brain working because you're trying to figure out where was the other reset? The reaping at the end of the 1,000 years. 2 angels, both of you, put in your sickle and reap. One of them had to reap the grapes of wrath. That was probably a lot more work than the narrow road. Amen. Hallelujah. Aho. Aloha, arrivederci, ciao, sayonara, auf Wiedersehen, nakamin, adios, amigo. See you later.